Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review comes from 1969, and it's the relatively new Indicator release, Death of a Gunfighter, starring Richard Widmark and Lena Horne, with a nice little appearance by John Saxon. This was directed by Alan Smithee, and it's arguably the greatest film Alan Smithee has directed. But we'll get to him in a second. This is spy number 290, and as always with Indicators limited editions, you've got a lovely booklet, and you have the reversible artwork. Now obviously 1969 there was another western which is a bit more famous than the Death of a Gunfighter. That's Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. But this makes an interesting little double bill. The original director, Robert Totten, left the project after 25 days. Don Siegel took over and finished the film off in a couple of weeks. But Richard Widmark didn't want Robert Totten's name on the project, and Don Siegel felt he didn't do enough to warrant his name being on the project. So I believe this is the first example of Alan Smithee, who doesn't actually exist, given the directing credit of a film. But he has made quite a lot of films over the years, not as many nowadays, but I believe The Death of a Gunfighter is the first example of an Alan Smithee film. Now the film itself, there's a lot going on, and as I said, it's a wonderful double bill with The Wild Bunch. Richard Widmark stars as Marshal Patch, who has been a marshal of Cottonwood Springs for 20 years, but his style of shoot first, ask questions later has left 12 people dead. And the town, or the town's leaders, are looking to make changes and to steer the town into more prosperity and that dollar bill y'all. And into the 20th century, the mayor even drives a motorised carriage, or as some people might call it, an automobile, which is always a sign in westerns that it's the end of an era. Of course, Richard Widmark doesn't see it that way. The film opens with him shooting somebody else, who, to be fair, is threatening to shoot him. And eventually this character dies, and that sets off the town going, enough's enough. 12, we were getting a bit annoyed, but 13 corpses is getting ridiculous. But the really clever thing that this film does is it doesn't necessarily tell you what side you're supposed to be on, as far as whether to root for Richard Widmark, feel sorry for Richard Widmark, to be on the side of the townsfolk against Richard Widmark. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the film's kind of been forgotten about, because there's not a clear, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys. Obviously, watching it from 2023, pretty much everybody's bad. Widmark carries a lot of the Old West with him, that shoot first, ask questions later. When people say things he doesn't like, he tends to punch them. He's not a thoroughly likeable character. But then the townspeople aren't wonderful either. The bar that they kind of frequent is called the Alamo, and the bar that Richard Widmark's girlfriend slash madam is called the Goliad, which apparently was a site of a Mexican victory over white people. So there goes just across the street. There's lots of kind of undercurrents of racial tension without being too explicit about it. There's an interracial marriage between Richard Widmark and Lena Horne near the end of the film. As the leaders of the community get more and more worked up and become more and more savage, and obviously, ironically, more and more like the Old West themselves that they're trying to forget. There's little bubbles of racism as far as how they talk to the Jewish members of their supposed upstanding society and town leaders. They have goes at each other about their own race and their own religions, so they end up being really fractured. It does have similarities to High Noon, apart from it's got a slightly different ending. There's so much stuff going on. Richard Widmark, this kind of hints that he knows all the town's kind of corrupt secrets and things like that, which isn't explored that deeply, but certainly there's something that turns up that he knows about. As you have one of the characters who has a perhaps stressful relationship with his son, and then we end up finding out a little bit more about that story. Again, very much like the Bud Bedicker films, Death of a Gunfighter is fairly economical, doesn't hang about, which was probably the Don Siegel influence. There's lots of actors that you'll recognise their faces, but perhaps not their names. Like Carol O'Connor, who was the Rod Steiger character in the TV series version of In the Heat of the Night. He's really the main villain, I guess. He's not necessarily the leader of the town elders, if you like, but he kind of helps whip people into a fury and try to whip them into a lather to get them to go after Richard Widmark, who obviously doesn't want to leave his post, so they come up with more extreme measures to get rid of him. Kent Smith, Morgan Woodward, so again, names that you might not recognise, but you recognise their faces for sure. And as I said, John Saxon turns up as I think what is inferred as a Mexican deputy or marshal to help get rid of Richard Widmark. And again, the town elders have like casual racism kind of thrown in his direction. Even Richard Widmark has a little racial dig at him. And again, from the town elders' perspective, it's almost like, as they do with their Jewish comrade, it's like, we'll let you in and we'll treat you okay as long as you do what you tell us and as long as you supply us with your percentage of money. So the film does have this little exploration of race kind of bubbling under the surface. The town itself has like park benches and lighting, and they have a nice big plan in their office of what the town's supposed to look like in the future. And obviously people like Richard Widmark, there's no place for them. Widmark kind of knows this, but as he says, he wants to hang around to actually see how it all works out for them, and obviously that's not good enough for them. They want rid of him as quickly as possible. There's a scene with him and his very young assistant, who's clueless about everything, including sex, which he asks Richard Widmark about. And the two of them are smoking pipes and fishing next to a riverbank when the kind of town elders appear with the mayor in front driving his motorised carriage. And there's a wonderful little moment when the mayor and all the town superiors are trying to walk across a log across the river with not much success, to kind of read him his resignation or tell him that they're going to fire him, which he's obviously not too pleased about. It's just, for a film that is directed by Alan Smithee, there's a lot going on and it's really wonderful, and it probably would make my top 50 westerns of all time. It's just so good. Widmark is the right age to play it. You can imagine him being there for 20 years. And the fact that he is not instantly likeable, his actions sometimes are, like somebody says something cheeky to him and he just punches them out. He's not an immediately likeable or rootable character. There is that kind of it's up to the audience whether you like him or not, which obviously always gives audiences problems. That's how people like Cronenberg get into trouble, for not judging the characters as a filmmaker, just leaving it up to the audience to make their own mind up how they feel about characters. And that's what the film does really well as far as Richard Widmark's character, and obviously the ending is wonderful as well. This release is fantastic also. It's got an audio commentary by C. Courtney Joyner and historian Henry Park from 2023. C. Courtney Joyner does a lot of westerns and film noirs. And then the wonderful Neil Sinyard gives a 22-minute piece about the making of the film and also the themes in the film. And then there's a 24-minute piece by Richard Dyer about Lena Horne, who was the first African American singer, if you like, or first female African American singer to get a contract at MGM, but then they didn't really know what to do with her. So even though she sings the titles, not the title song, but she sings a song over the titles in this film, she doesn't sing in the film. It is actually a quote-unquote straight role. And there's a interesting little 10-minute short from 1962, Exercise Number 1, which was filmed by USC Cinema Department under the supervision of Fred Zinnemann, who also directed High Noon, and starring Richard Widmark as somebody who's driving along the road. They get a flat tire and then they start getting shot at, which is a really nice little film. And again, you get the booklet. So it's a wonderful release by indicator of, again, a film that I wasn't really aware of. I think I'd heard of it. The film is that kind of late 60s, almost anti... it kind of looks more like a TV movie than a kind of widescreen cinema experience, and a kind of anti-composition film, if you like. But it's lots of sweaty close-ups, as Neil Sinyard points out in his video essay. Just about everybody sweats really badly in this film. It's a very sweaty film. It's ranked number 13 in my sweatiest westerns of all time. But it's such a good film if you're that way inclined. Is it perfect? No. But it's just so good in the themes of an end of an era and a man out of place. And again, just the fact that the film doesn't judge Richard Widmark. In some ways you could look at it and saying, well, it's actually saying that it's a bad thing that the way the gun or the law of the gun is kind of dying out. Because look at these businessmen. They're rather terrible people who all have their own secrets. They all visit the prostitutes every now and again, and they're not the pillars of society that they actually believe themselves to be. But then it also says you can't really go about punching people who disagree with you, or shooting people dead instead of maybe trying to take them into custody. So it's a wonderful example of just not telling the audience who they should be rooting for, or telling the audience how they should be feeling about people. It's up into the audience to actually decide how they feel about characters themselves, which is what you're supposed to do, rather than telling them what they should be thinking and feeling second by second during the film. So this is another wonderful release by Indicator. Again, I'm not sponsored by Indicator or anything, but please do join me on Chris Mohan's channel on Thursday the 9th, and we'll be talking more about Indicator releases. So thanks very much for watching this random review of Death of a Gunfighter from 1969. Please let me know in the comments if you've seen this film before, and let me know what you think of it. And hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.